Okay, where are we at? Nine. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to week two. I hope uh, y'all had a good week. I think this week was really just getting things organized. Did anyone off the top of the bat have anything that came up, any issues getting things that they needed, or had any questions that we should talk about right off the start? All good? Um, okay, awesome. So I finally had a chance to pick my fabric this week. I was so deep in the move that I didn't actually have a chance to grab my stack. So I picked about 80 fabrics um, from my stash. I think last week I had said that I was going to try to do a solid quilt, and then I started to look at all the boxes of my stash and I was like, but this is a little bit more fun. So I just started pulling fabric out of my stash. I'll show you quickly what I've picked out. I mean, some of this is maybe half of what I've chosen, but there's the fabric. This was my inspiration fabric here. So I just saw this fabric in my stash and I was like, oh, I think this is kind of a cute little palette. So it's kind of like navy with some orange and gray and cream. And I have a lot of those colors. So that's what I'm gonna work with. And I started cutting out. It's actually very strange to have everybody muted because it just feels like I'm talking to myself. So today I wanted to just go over getting ready for preparing your templates and then cutting a fabric and then doing a test block. So I think last week for those who were here, I mentioned um, I thought it was a good idea to rather than cut all your fabric out, which is one approach to making a quilt, to cut a little bit out and do a test block just to make sure that you understand the block, that you understand that that you're cutting everything correctly before you get too far into the project, and then you can make any adjustments. So I thought we could do that today. And then really kind of the next 2 to 3 weeks is just going to be like cutting and sewing. So you can kind of like divvy that up in whatever way that you want to. I allowed sort of first week was cutting and then the next 2 weeks would be sort of assembling the block. So you can kind of mix and match the next like 2 to 3 weeks in whatever way makes sense to you. Um, so I know that a few people in the group do have the ruler, but probably a lot of people are working with the templates. So I'll start by talking about working with the templates and then I will show the ruler because there are also some folks who said that they would be willing to lend their ruler out. And the nice thing about the ruler is that it does make this part of the project go really quickly. So with the ruler, the Pathways ruler, you can probably cut it out, pretty easily within just a few hours, your entire quilt. With the templates, it's just a little bit more manual work, so it probably will take you a little bit longer. Both are going to work totally fine. So um, if you're working with the template, you just want to get your printout of the templates. There's a concave and convex template, and then just make sure that you've printed it at the right size. So there is that little test box on the pattern piece so that you can just do a little measure and make sure that it's 1 inch so that you're not going to cut that your printer hasn't resized it, made it smaller or a little bit bigger. Usually it's smaller, so you want to make sure that you're doing the right size. So the block is meant to finish at 7 inches, which means that when you finish sewing your block, when you measure it, it's going to be 7.5 inches square. So with the template piece, what I like to do is if you just try to trace around a flimsy piece of paper, it's going to um, sort of degrade and it'll get smaller and change size. So the best thing to do is to apply the paper template onto either cardboard or plastic. Plastic being sort of the best thing because that's not going to shift sizes. Usually if you do cardboard, you'll find that the edges will start to kind of come in a little bit. So you can use either like a template plastic, which is like an actual sewing project. I also mentioned that you can get like a a dollar store um, placemat or other piece of sort of random thin plastic. You can use cardboard, and I do use cardboard templates for certain things, but because we want to make sure that the curve stays, the curved edge especially stays accurate. I feel like for this, you do want to, and you're going to be tracing it like 80 times. You do want to have the most sort of accurate template that you can. So to apply it to your plastic, what you want to do is you want to rough cut it. So you don't want to cut directly on the lines um, just yet. Just kind of like roughly cut around the shape, which I've done here. And then like with a glue stick, you're going to like glue stick the back of it and then apply it to your plastic. And then once it's on your plastic, then you're going to cut around the actual line. And that'll give you the most accurate, that'll give you the most accurate template. So I started to do this piece here. So just, I had it applied. You can see it's the main line is still there. I did my first cut here, and then I'm going to go in and do the second cut. So you'll see the template has two lines. The dark line is the sewing line, and the dotted line is going to be your cut line. So you want to make sure that you're using the cut line when you're cutting around. So with my scissor, I would just go in and I'm just going to cut on that dotted line. And that's going to give me my accurate template. So, and then you'll have like a nice hard template that you can use. Just gonna do this last bit here. There you go. So applying like applying the paper template onto a piece of plastic or cardboard, whatever you have, really. If you do a cardboard template, you may want to end up doing a couple versions of that if you notice that it does start to get a little bit wobbly. But that's how you're going to sort of set up your templates so that they're nice and sturdy and they'll last a really long time. So you're going to have that, and then I would do my second one, and then you'll have the two. So once you've got your templates, then you're ready to start tracing. One of the things that I mentioned about getting your fabrics ready is it's nice to have them pre-cut into squares. And one of the reasons that I like to do that is because you can be really efficient with your fabric if you've already got it pre-cut into a square. And it does also make the either using the templates or using the ruler go a little bit faster. So what we found is the most efficient square that you can use, like the smallest square that you can use with your ruler is that 8.5 inch. So I've got my 8.5 inch ruler here. With your 8.5 inch ruler, this is sort of the ideal amount of fabric where you're going to have the least amount of waste. And so if you are like I am working with like 80 different fabrics, the first thing that I would do is I would take this ruler or again, make your own square template, and I would cut I'm going to cut an 8.5 inch square out of all of my fabrics, and then I'll just have those ready. So then once you've got those, you're going to have these pieces that are ready for applying your template or using the ruler with. And the nice thing about having the pieces cut is that gives you two square edges that are already ready for just laying the template down on. So it kind of saves you a little bit of time if you use the ruler, and then that means you're going to get one of each of your fabrics. Now I know that there are some people who are maybe doing something a little bit more scrappy, and so you may be just applying your template onto like smaller pieces of fabric, and that's totally fine. But if you're wanting to be really efficient with uh, your time and your fabrics, the way that you're cutting them, then I would recommend just going in and doing and it could be if you have a ruler that's a different size. So that, again, this is just the most efficient, least waste um, square that you can use. But if you've got, a 9 inch or a 9.5 inch ruler, you can use that. The Pathways ruler is also a square ruler. So if you've got that, you can use that as your square piece that you're cutting out. So you could just use that. So it's going to give you a nice square cut. That's going to be plenty of fabric to do, and there'll just be a little bit more waste. So it's your call on what makes the most sense for you when you're cutting out. And then, so the nice thing about, and we're just going to use this piece of cardboard as an example of if this was my piece of fabric. So the nice thing about this is once you've got your template cut out, which I put down somewhere. Once you've got your template cut out and you've got your squares of fabric, then the templates can just slide onto the corner of your fabric, and those two edges are already done. And then you can just carefully trace with a fabric marker the first curve. This piece is the piece that I would always cut first, whether you're using your templates or you're using the ruler. You want to kind of cut this little notched piece out, the little uh, concave piece out first, and then it just makes it a little bit easier to cut the next one. So for me, this is the first one that I would trace and cut with either the template or the ruler. So you're going to do this one first. So, and again, the nice thing about having your nice square pieces ready to go is that those two edges are going to be done for you. And then when you do the second one, which I don't have mine cut out yet, it's going to slide. I'll just use my paper version. So this is a rough cut, but it's going to slide onto the other edge. So then the other edge is just going to slide onto the other two edges, and then you'll just be able to trace and cut those out really efficiently. So this is sort of the easiest, most efficient way to use the templates on your pre-cut squares of fabric. So again, 8.5 would be the minimum size, but whatever square size that is easy for you for whatever ruler or tool that you've got is going to be fine. This is just the least amount of waste, and I've got a couple pieces here I can show you. So when you cut out from a 8.5 inch square, the waste from that is going to be this, and this. So it really doesn't waste very much from the square of fabric. So that's kind of why I chose that as sort of an ideal amount of fabric to cut. So that is if you're using the templates, and I would use whatever thin marking tool that you've got, whether it's a really thin friction marker. And because these are going to be your cutting lines, even if you use like a regular pencil or something that's sharp, you're going to be cutting on those lines. So it's not a marking that's going to remain in your fabric really. So whatever marking tool you have accessible for doing this marking, as long as it's a nice sharp line, is going to be totally fine. So I would just use whatever tool for this tracing part that you have available. So that's preparing the templates. Does anyone have any questions about working with the templates? All
I
good?
have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you be specific with the tracing tool, like what you use? I know I've used
Oh, sure.
a mechanical pencil before, but that doesn't work on darker
Hmm.
fabrics. Like, so can you elaborate?
Yeah, so I have a mechanical pencil that actually has like different colored leads. So I use that quite a bit. So I've got a bohin pencil, which is probably in my toolkit. Where did I put it? That's got white lead in it. So I would use those on dark fabrics. So I use that quite a bit. I do actually use the friction markers for marking, and there's really fine ones. Again, those don't really give the on a dark fabric, they don't really show up as well. So I do have the white leaded pencil. And the nice thing with the leads for those pencils is I have like a white and I have a black. So you can kind of switch the leads between those pencils as well. And again, it doesn't have to be for this particular use. It doesn't have to be a fabric specific tool because we're not marking through the fabric. If we were marking through the fabric, I'm very, very careful, especially on a quilt, what I would use. I don't really use any true marking tools that would leave any kind of residue on my quilt fabric. So, but for this particular use, because it is just the line that you're cutting against and through, um, I kind of feel like you could almost use like any writing, any sort of like a sharp pencil, regular pencil that would work as well. Yeah. Any
Can
other template
I have a
questions?
question. Um,
Yeah.
why would you do it in two steps of tracing it first and then cutting? Like if you've got the square
Oh,
and you're,
sorry. That's a great question. What I
yeah,
was when I was talking about that, I think what I was doing is because I was cutting my fabrics from using the ruler last night. That was definitely the way that you want to do it when you're using the ruler, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But yes, you're right. If you're just tracing your templates onto a square of fabric with the paper templates, it doesn't matter. You're tracing both of those lines right off the bat, and then you're correct. And then it doesn't matter which one you're cutting. What does matter is when you're using the ruler, you're going to be actually cutting. You're going to be laying this down on the fabric, and then you're going to be cutting. And it's definitely trickier if you cut the convex one first. So you definitely with the ruler want to cut the other one first. So you're correct, Faye. Thank you.
oh no,
I
I
didn't
actually,
pre-cut.
yeah, I actually meant when you're
Go ahead.
using, if you make a plastic template, right?
Yes.
Um, and you put it down, why would you not just cut along the curve rather um than trace it?
Trace.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So why are you even tracing?
Yeah,
Is that your question? Yeah.
I guess so, yeah.
Um, mhm. So the templates, I think, I mean, you could try it, but generally, if you are cutting against the templates, you're probably going to start shaving the template down. Because the template isn't really not the same as a ruler. So when you're cutting against these thick acrylic rulers, you're not changing the shape of the ruler, but more likely you're going to start shaving off even like tiny hairs and maybe larger chunks off your template if you're actually cutting against it. And so I definitely think you'll see that your shapes are going to change if you're cutting against your thinner template. So that's kind of, I guess, one of the trickier, that's why there's sort of an extra step with the template version versus the ruler version where you're actually just cutting your fabric specifically as without the tracing step. So that is definitely the ruler definitely removes a layer of work. Does that make sense? Um, the accuracy, it, the accuracy is something that is important in quilting because we've got such a narrow seam allowance. I would say the benefit to this project again is that we do only have two pieces. There's only two pieces, so there's less chance for us to make mistakes in terms of how those two pieces come together. If you're doing a quilt block that has 10 pieces, every time you sew, or every time your template is like even a little bit off in all of those pieces, things can definitely get even, exponentially more wonky as you go along. But with two pieces, theoretically, our chances of things, going off kilter are a little bit less because we have less chances to do that. But we still want to make sure that, like, as much as possible, all of our pieces are exactly the same, so that our blocks are going to be similarly the same. Okay. But anyways, sorry, even though that wasn't your question, that brought up a good point about the templates, because I was thinking more in terms of how I was cutting out with the ruler last night. So when you are cutting out with the templates, it does not matter which of you're going to trace the two lines on your fabric, and then you can just cut them. And obviously you don't even have to cut them. You do all your tracing, put your pieces aside, and then cut them. So the process is a little bit different with the templates, where you can kind of do a bunch of tracing, tracing on your blocks, and then you can do a bunch of cutting. Whereas with the template, you're going to be just cutting directly as soon as you lay your ruler down. So, so I wanted to talk about the ruler just real quick. So the ruler does 3 different size blocks. So the block is traditionally called a drunkard's path block. So it's just a curved block. And there are definitely different drunkard's path templates and rulers out there. I did do a little bit of research to try to find if there was something similar that did a similar size, but there are no other rulers or templates that I found that do the 7-inch block. So this ruler does a 3.5-inch block, a 5-inch block, and a 7-inch finished block. And we're doing the 7-inch block for this particular project. So one of the things that I do sometimes when I'm using a ruler over and over again is I'll use washi tape to help remind me of places that I do want to line up, and maybe things that I don't want to line up to. So I don't need this now, but I just wanted to show you when I first started using this ruler, I put tape over the curved pieces that I don't want to cut through. Just as a reminder, like, this is not where, these are not the slots that I want my rotary cutter to go in accidentally. So I just, as a visual cue, sometimes will use tape on my rulers to kind of remind me where I do or don't want to go. And so I just put the tape on here just to show you, like, there are the 2 slots that you're not going to be using. And so the way that the ruler works is that you kind of are going to be flipping it depending on which curve you're cutting. And so that might be kind of hard to see, but there's a concave and a convex side. And I'll just put so if you look in here. So on the ruler, there's sort of a 1-inch border around, and then there's like a darker line if you have the ruler. So where you're going to be placing your fabric, your square cut fabric to cut, is along this sort of inner border, and it's marked with a really dark line. So you're kind of dropping your cut square inside the border. And then, as I said, the first cut that you want to make with this is the concave convex. I've mixed those up. The convex cut. So you're going to lay your fabric here, and then you're going to drop your rotary cutter into this slot and then cut here. And then that's going to give you one of these pieces. So this gets cut out of here. And then once you've got that cut, the second one is the most complicated, and you can kind of see in the instructions, what we're going to do is you have to kind of flip the ruler around. And this is where I've made 2 other markings, because then I want to just trim off the rest of the piece that I've got left to be 7.5 inches square. So on my ruler, I've put 2 little tape markings so that I can see where my 7.5 inch line is really quickly. So that means that I'm going to turn my ruler around like this. So what I'm trying to do with my second cut is I'm trying to shave down what's left so that it's only, and this little chunk will be gone. I'm going to shave down what's left to be 7.5 inches wide. So it's going to be a 7.5 inch wide. So that's why I've got these tape markings here, just to show me where the 7.5 inches really quickly. So I can flip my ruler around and just drop it on the edge of my fabric there. So I'm going to be cutting this little chunk here, which actually it would probably look more like this, sort of. I would have this like weird, this little, and then I'd be just trimming off these little extra bits here. And then once you've done that, this can slide into the concave. Then it slides into the concave. So there's a little bit of like twisting of the ruler when you use this. And so then this goes into the last curve here, like that. And because when you're doing blocks like this, I find that I really like to have, this is the cutting mat that I use. So I have one of these smaller rotating cutting mats. So I can, number one, I can kind of move around it, but also like I can just flip the cutting mat around, because I'm doing a lot of like twisting. So if I don't want to move my body around, I can just twist the mat around as I'm trying to move things around. So, and I also just find that when you're working with some smaller bits, just having a smaller cutting mat is helpful. So that will get you your pieces. So then now you're going to have your 2 pieces cut out with the ruler. So again, the nice thing with that is that you do just have like very small little bits that you're trimming away, and you have not a lot of waste with the 8.5 inch block. The ruler takes a little bit of time to get used to. Definitely find that having it marked made it a lot easier for me. That was one of the tricks that I did, but I would definitely do a couple little test cuts on, some fabric and try it out if you do have the ruler. But again, I don't know how many folks I think there was only like a handful of folks who did have the ruler who were in the group. Anyone who has a ruler have any questions about the ruler? You can also ask me questions as you try to use it.
Can I just backtrack a second? Ask another question? With the templates, do I cut these out with scissors? X-Acto knife? I don't use my rotary cutter on the plastic, so scissors is fine?
I use scissors personally, because I feel like that you'll get the most accurate cut that you can. I do have a rotary cutter blade that I use for paper and other like non-fabric things. So if you want your 2 straight lines to be straighter, I would swap that out. Theoretically, if you are using a ruler or some other straight edge to cut your squares out, then those 2 lines don't need to be the most accurate. But if you were going to be dropping them into smaller offcuts of scrap fabric, you may want to have like a super straight line there. So I do use a rotary cutter blade that's specific and marked for paper on those kinds of things too.
And so once it's traced on the fabric, then I would just use scissors to cut that concave and convex curve, correct?
So
Like
on
once,
your fabric, then yeah, on your fabric, I feel like it's going to be more efficient to use a rotary cutter. Like once it's on your fabric,
once
once
I've
your markings
traced
are
the
on your
fabric.
fabric,
Mhm.
once you've traced the fabric,
Yeah.
I personally, you could use this, of course you can use scissors if that's what you're most comfortable with, but it's going to be faster and probably in some ways potentially more accurate if you use a rotary cutter. And I did mention last week, you can use the regular size rotary cutter, but
Yes.
I do like a smaller rotary cutter for this project.
Mm-hmm.
I just find that you'll be able to angle around the curves a little bit easier.
Okay, thank you.
Mary, do you have your hand up? Yeah, no worries.
I do. I do. Thanks. Hi. I don't have one of those templates, but I'd like to borrow one maybe because it sounds like it really saves time.
Yeah,
But just
sure.
the convex piece is good, but for the
yeah,
cave piece, you basically used two different positions.
that's right.
Like, yeah,
There's two
okay,
different
so
positions.
but it seemed to be like flip
So
kind of to the mirror corner or whatever. Okay.
So the first, once you've cut out the convex piece, so once you've got that, you're basically kind of working with a piece that, that's a little bit bigger than this. You're going to have a scrap that's bigger than this. You're then trying to just make the you're kind of square up to 7.5 because our block was, or whatever square that you had your piece of fabric cut to, it was maybe like 8.5 inches. You're going to have a little extra. So that second cut, the first cut on the concave piece is to square it to 7.5. And then the second cut is going to be to make the curve. So what you're trimming off is like the little extra piece that's here. You're trimming off the little extra edge that's here before you cut this.
Yeah. Okay. I guess. Okay. You seem to flip it. I'm thinking you should be able to just cut those pieces off without doing the flip, but maybe you can. I just haven't
Yeah,
wrapped my
I
head
think
around
it's
it.
just the way that the markings are. Yeah, I think it's, if you have the ruler, it's just the way that the ruler is marked. For me, that I find the markings that I've got, there maybe visually there's maybe a better way for me to do it, but for me, the way that I've got the ruler marked, and the ruler is like marked in all directions, but I think for me, the way that I can see it visually is it's easier for me to flip it and then flip it back.
And if you don't cut
It
those two
doesn't,
little
and
pieces off, sorry, if you don't cut those two little pieces off first, that curved line is actually not long enough to cut out.
It won't go
I'm
through.
assuming.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
you'll just have,
okay.
yeah, exactly. It won't go through. So that's why you kind of want to
Okay.
get rid of them first.
Okay, thanks.
It does show that in it's, so if you do look at the instructions with the pattern, like it does walk through using the ruler. So it does show those two, those steps sort of laid out visually as well. And almost everyone who has a ruler is willing to share it. So if people are looking to borrow a ruler, maybe if you want to drop your name in the chat, we can try to connect people who are sort of close to each other. I do think, I mean, if you can't access a ruler, it definitely does make this step way more efficient and quick. It's I mean, really one of the reasons why we had, we're able to do this so quickly, is that it does just make that part go, you're taking one step out. So so maybe, yeah, if you want to drop your name in the chat, if you want a ruler, and maybe just sort of a general area of where you're at, we can connect people who are in Toronto to each other, because I know that there are some rulers in the West End. There's like a couple of rulers in the East End. I know that Anastasia has one, and she's kind of near Mississauga, Oakville. So we've got definitely we can make a list and try to connect people with rulers, because you really only need, theoretically, you only need, you can do it in like, if you've got a few hours, you can do that, all of that in like one day. And so if you were able to borrow a ruler from someone, you could definitely knock it out really quickly. And we'll I'll make a list and we can connect people. Fern, do you have a question?
Yes. For those who are going to use the template, do you have any tips, tricks, or recommendations for cutting the curve? Because with the ruler, you've got that hard edge that you can't really stray from, but with the line, if you have a wobbly hand, yeah. So do you have anything, any suggestions there?
I think my suggestions would be just, it's going to be a bit of practice and maybe just going slowly. So I would do some test ones. I think it's not a big curve, so that's one thing that I would say. So, and it is a fairly smooth curve. So I think that if you try a couple test blocks, then you'll probably find that it's not as difficult as it might seem. I would just go slowly, and I think I mean, you're going to do it a bunch of times, so you're going to get really good at it. So that would be my recommendation. I think just it's not too hard to do a curve. I think, just go really slowly, and you kind of like, well, you kind of build up that little muscle memory for the curve that you're going to be doing.
Thank you.
Of course, Fern. Any other template questions? Really quick.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Question.
It just left my brain.
Of course.
It was, oh, I know. So the ruler versus the template that's in the Handmade Getaway book. Because for example, if I'm going to borrow a ruler, like in theory, if I don't get it all finished, would using the templates and using the ruler give me the same size and shape of a curve?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the same, but let me confirm. I put in my piece on. Yeah, it's the same. There's, and I think, well, one of the things I can see here, like there's like, I'm just what I was doing is putting my cut piece that I cut with the ruler on top of the piece, and you can see like with the ruler, like this slot that you're putting your rotary cutter in is pretty thin. I think it's like an 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to say it's like an 1/8 of an inch. So depending on, sort of a little bit your angle that you're running your cutter through there, I can see that there, even probably with each of the pieces that I cut with the ruler, there may be some slight differences in the curves. I don't think it's anything that you would ever notice. But like this is not, the end result is going to be that you're going to get a 7-inch finished block, and I don't think this slight difference that you may see between the two shouldn't be is probably tolerable, and not nothing that's going to be
thank you
drastically different. No worries. Okay. So how many folks out there have never sewn a curve before? Anyone? Has everyone sewn some type of curve before? Oh, a few. Okay. Rosa. That's not true. You've sewn a curve before. You just don't like to.
Yes, and I've broken rules to do it, so this may not be different.
Okay. So sewing curves is definitely one of those things that is kind of is fearful for some people, but I think that it is, again, this is a great way to get over that fear, because we're just going to be doing the same thing over and over again. So this is always the best way to get really good at doing something. And so I think that this quilt is going to make you really good at it. So one of the odd things about sewing the curves is that we're going to be kind of putting two pieces together that are going to feel like they don't want to go together. And I think this is kind of one of the things with sewing that can be hard to wrap your mind around, is like how the things come together and sort of visualizing then where they're going to go after that. So we've got these two pieces that need to sort of come together this way to make our block. But in order to get them together this way, we have to put them together this way. So we're going to put them together sort of face to face. So this probably doesn't, the way that these two shapes are coming together is going to seem very awkward. So when you're sewing curves together, we're trying to, and if you were doing like a sleeve on a garment, you're basically trying to put like, potentially like a tube to a circle, or in this case, we're doing sort of a quarter to a quarter. So what we always want to do when we're trying to line things up is to find points that match each other. And so with this piece to the other piece, we know that the edges need to match to each other, but we can also give ourselves like a few other points that are going to help. So usually what I like to do is I like to give myself 3 points to match. So we're going to match to the two edges, but then we're also going to match to the center. So what I like to do with my pieces, I like to just fold both of these pieces before I try to pin them together in half. And I'll just kind of finger press that halfway point like that. So now I know where, now I've got 3 points. So now I've got my outer, and then I've got a little sort of folded piece that I can see here on the center. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my other piece here. So I'm going to fold it in half. And then I'm going to just pinch that little piece there. And you can mark that with a pin or something, but you're going to do this over and over again. I feel like you'll be able to see these little pinch marks for yourself. They just kind of like pinch the fabric. And so you just get like that little, you can kind of see that little crease there in your fabric. So whenever we sew, we're usually sewing right sides together. So we're going to put our printed fabrics together. And so I like to start by matching the center. So that little center crease that you made is going to get matched to the center crease on the other one. And that's a really good place to just start. So you're just going to pin those two pieces together. And then just stick a pin in it. So then you'll have this, and that's going to seem weird. So now the next thing that we want to match to each other are the two edges. So this is where we're going to kind of basically just make the fabric do what we want. So we're just going to curve the edge of the fabric so that we're now lining up the two edges to each other. And you're just going to do that on both sides. So don't worry about what the fabric's doing, just as long as you're doing face to face and you're just lining up those two edges. And then I'm just going to do the same. So you're really just kind of twisting the fabric to a line and then pinning. So then you're going to have sort of those 3 points pinned. So the fabric is starting to do what you want it to do. It's starting to kind of curve into the 2 opposing curves. Now I like to do, some people will sew with that many pins. That's not usually enough pins for me. I'll usually put like maybe 2 more. Some people will put like 3 or 4 more. You can put as many pins as you want to feel comfortable. So I'll usually do maybe 1 or 2 more here. So then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the sections. So let's go between the center to the section here. And then I'm just going to take my fabric and I'm going to gently kind of tug so that those 2 fabrics just kind of nest a little bit more nicely to each other. And I kind of just, I'm going to pinch in the center of that curved edge, and I'm going to pop a pin in there. Just like that. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to just sort of gently pull. Now the thing with the once we've cut all these curves in our fabric, the fabric, you have to be careful about how you handle them because the fabric can start to distort. So we don't want to overstretch. I'm just gently kind of pulling the fabric so that it nests. And then in the center, I'm just going to pop a pin in there. And then you may want to do a couple more. And again, like I said, I feel like in the beginning, it's better to have more pins. And then as you go along, you may start to feel comfortable doing less. But the more pins I put, you can see the more the fabric kind of knows where it's supposed to go. So even here, I can just gently put a next pin in the center. And then you can keep going if you want to over. There's no such thing as over pinning, really. So there's that side versus that side. You can see this side is definitely more together. This side's got like a few little bubbles, and if you want to get it pre-set up, just pull that in. Pop a couple more pins in. When you're kind of gently pulling, you are trying to make sure, obviously, that your edges are lined up to each other. Oops. So you should have something like that. And then we're going to be sewing all of our seams in patchwork at 1/4 of an inch. And so we want to be accurate with that. And if you have some people may have a 1/4 inch foot for their sewing machine if they've done patchwork before. And if you don't, that's totally fine. Your machine may have some markings for the 1/4 inch, but if it doesn't have markings, then you do want to mark it. And I would say, I would recommend whatever you want to do, you want to just be consistent. So you want to just make sure that you're using a consistent 1/4 inch for the whole project. That's obviously just going to give you the most consistency between all your squares. So you can mark, again, this is a place where you may want to use washi tape. So if you've got washi tape or some other tape, you can mark your 1/4 inch to give you that line on your machine. And then that way you can know that you're using the same, you're using the same 1/4 inch for the entire project. So having that line marked will just help you stay more consistent, I find, unless you're using a 1/4 inch foot, then that is going to also be a way to stay consistent. What you want to do is just keep the most sort of consistent 1/4 inch that you can throughout the whole project. So with a bit of washi tape, you can measure from if you don't have that marked on your machine, you can just measure from the center of your needle outwards with a little ruler and then lay your tape down. And then when you're sewing, you're going to want to try to stay sort of within, and they call it like a scant, a scant quarter inch is sort of the term that's used a lot when you're sewing that quarter inch. And that just means that rather than being, you definitely don't want to be on the other side of the line. You always want to be on the inside of the quarter inch line. So you don't want to be giving more to the seam allowance. You always want to be giving a little bit less. And the reason for that is once we press the fabric, there's always going to be a little bit of that fabric edge that takes away from the seam allowance. So if you're erring on the side of sewing a bigger seam allowance, your block is just going to shrink more. So it's better to have a slightly bigger block than a too small block if you're going to err. So the scant quarter inch is going to give you a little bit more room to sort of press out your block and have that full 7.5 inches when it's done. Does anyone have questions about pinning their block and getting this part ready? Mary?
Maybe I'm a bit ahead, thank you, but and
That's okay.
Obviously I've never done a quilt, so I've got lots of questions, but is there a preferred side to sew on? Do you know what I mean? Are you better to sew with that? Oh, you are? Okay, sorry.
Yeah. No, that's okay. That's okay. Your mind is going in the right direction. I'm just going to check in with Romina first.
No, I had the same question because I remember like there's one side that ends up being like a little bit more bunched up. Does that go up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I prefer to sew with that side up. So I think you could try it both ways. But for me, I don't want to have those bubbles underneath. I want to sort of be able to manage the bulkier part. So I usually sew with I'll never get this right. I want to sew with the concave. I like to sew with the concave side up. I just keep looking at my ruler. And I do that when I'm sewing garments too. Like when I'm sewing like a sleeve, I always want to have that fuller piece on top because I like to be able to, as I'm sewing, kind of smooth out that extra fabric as I go along to make sure that I don't have any little hidden bubbles in the curve. So I'm going to sew with this side face up. Good question. Okay.
Karen, I have a question. I have a comment, or I guess it's a question.
Oh, great.
I have been in a class, and I don't know if it was with Johanna or someone else. I don't remember. Where we didn't use pins, but we glued with a thin little glue stick. And I'm wondering if you've ever tried that and what the pros and cons are to glue versus pin.
Yes. So I feel like I've tried it, but it's not something that I kept doing. I think a glue stick there's a lot of ways that you can use a glue stick in sewing, and that can definitely, if you're have trouble with pins, and you're happy using a bit of glue, then you can definitely do that. I feel like for me, it's not something that I don't know if for me, I in some ways like the pinning process. I like that part of it. I like how accurate it is, and I like the stability of it. And because you're doing so many curves, I'm sure you would get good at it. But for me, I'm going to say that I'm a pinner. So this just makes me think of something. The latest issue of the Uppercase Encyclopedia Notions just came out, and it's all about sewing. And it is a really cool, if anyone hasn't taken a look at it yet, it's such a cool book Janine put together, but it's all about like every element of sewing. So like there's every rulers and pins and scissors and buttons and everything. Then she featured a whole bunch of things, but she asked, there's a little feature on the workroom, and she asked all the people, what is your favorite notion? And I was like, my favorite notion is a pin. I was like, it's really boring. It's like it's maybe not that interesting, but to me, pins are such a great tool. They allow you to do so much. And I really liked, especially just these plain little white glass head pins. So although I definitely don't have anything against using a glue stick, I feel like for me it's not the way that I would do it. But I think you should try it. And I may try it just out of curiosity to see a couple, because it doesn't hurt. Anastasia?
I just wanted to mention a couple things about the glue stick. I would say you really need to watch that you're not distorting that curve, because that's a possibility, depending on like the pressure you're putting, and if you're like, are you putting a few dots along the curve, or are you just swiping along it? So that's one thing to watch for. But also, I find when I sew curves that I like to pin, because I like to have that room to adjust. Sometimes I will not pin them right. So if you glue, you're manipulating that curve to adjust it if you happen to not get it right the first time. So that's just a couple things to consider.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think it's true, like you can with the pins, you can shift things around a little bit as you go. If you're gluing it, yeah, that would be a little bit tricky. I feel like there's other places that I would use the glue stick, but maybe not with a curve also. But anyone else?
I have a question.
Yeah. Hey, Luna.
Hello. I have a question on mixing different types of fabrics. My quilt is going to be scrappy, as I do, and I have a mixture of batiks and regular quilting cottons. I am wondering if the combination, because batik is denser, it is not as flexible as the regular. Do you think I will have trouble with fitting the two pieces together? Like it will not be as smooth, or should I, go ahead with my vision?
I think it's true. Like with batiks, they are a little bit stiffer almost, and maybe not as stretchy as like a regular quilting cotton. So I think I think you should still be fine, because, theoretically within the curve, you should get a little bit of bias. There should be a little bit of stretch. It's maybe just less stretch than, a regular fabric. I would say that you may notice that difference if your batik fabric is, if your batik fabrics are this piece, this is maybe where you may notice that there's, specifically, it might give you a little bit of a challenge. I would say, like, I would do a test one and see like how it feels. I think you should be fine. But it may maybe require maybe more pins, but potentially, just to get it to be stretched out the way that you want it to go. But I think you should be okay. I feel like I'm trying to think. I don't think I had any in my other quilt. But I think you should be okay. But I would definitely, if that's something that you're thinking about, just do a little test. Maybe put one of the batiks in your test block, and then just see if you notice anything that's particularly challenging.
Thank you.
Yeah, but that's a good point. Yeah, there is. I do have. I think I've got a couple canvas prints that or like, I'm kind of gonna mix in some Essex linen and a few cotton canvas prints into my blocks as well. And so those definitely will sort of behave a little bit differently than all of the other cottons, but I think it should be fine. So I definitely do mix fabrics, and that's definitely something that I would do. You know, want to add, I feel like it's fun to add in those little extra pieces. And I try not to discriminate against the type of fabric that they are. They're all allowed. Any other questions about putting the block together, cutting things out? Any general questions? How's everyone feeling about getting going on their quilts? Anyone can just unmute now. Excited, nervous. Ooh, Nadia, what did you say that today or yesterday?
I jumped ahead and tried it out last night. I have the Pathways ruler, but I'm going to walk through the instructions in the book, but it kind of boggles my brain. But I'm going to try it out. But I used the templates, and I just wanted to see if I could still sew a curve. And I'm actually pretty impressed that the block is close to 7.5. I was like, it's going to be a parallelogram. There's no way. But it worked out good. I'm excited.
Amazing. Yeah, so the idea with the test block is you want to like try out a block this week or more than one block. You want to do your block, and then once you've sewn your block, you want to measure it out, and it should be close to 7.5 inches. One of the things, again, that I mentioned before is you will find that it is helpful to have some kind of flattening spray or starch spray because we're sewing these curves. I like to spray my cut squares. So all my squares, I spray them with starch so that they're nice and flat, sort of a little bit more flat and crisp. And then I'll do my cutting out of the template. So that just gives you a nice firm piece, and then the pieces also have a little bit of starch in them when you go to sew them. And then once you've sewn them and you've maybe I didn't actually do a sew a block, but once you've sewn them and you're about to press them, one thing that you can do, especially if you're kind of at your machine, I like to batch. You know, once you get going, you can kind of batch this. Like I'll pin, you know, a stack of blocks, and then I'll sew a bunch of blocks, and then I'll iron a bunch of blocks. So I like to kind of do things in batches. But one of the things with the flatter that you can do is you can use the flatter and you can finger press your block. So finger pressing just means that before you go to your iron, you're going to kind of like gently open up your block, and then you can kind of with your finger sort of gently press out the seam carefully before you give it a hit with the iron. So you can kind of put the flatter in there first, and then you can do a bit of finger pressing to get your block flat, and then you can give it a good press with the iron. And again, when you're pressing with the iron, you're kind of pressing and you're not actually like stretching. So you don't want to kind of do too much like moving of the iron across your block, because you don't actually want to stretch out your curve too much. You kind of want to, I like to sort of pre-press it with my fingers and then kind of press downwards, and not a lot of like scrubbing. You're not trying to scrub your fabric with the iron. You're really trying to just get that heat on it to press it flat. So just be mindful with you know, stretching out your fabric with the iron. It's really meant to be more sort of pressed downwards. And so I usually will do some finger pressing. Yes, Mary.
Sorry, one more question. Do you batch even the ironing? So once you sew it, you can just put collect them all and then go and iron them all. You don't have to. Okay. Okay.
Exactly. So, I mean, you're doing a lot of things. So I always find that it's nice to kind of do things in batches. So, you know, pin as many as you can. So, maybe just as many pins as you have. You're probably going to run out of pins potentially when you're doing this. So pin a little stack, then you sew a little stack, and then you can iron, finger press a little stack, and then use your iron as well. So definitely, I find that things feel for me more efficient if I'm doing like all of the same thing over and over again, and then moving on to the next task, and that just feels better for me. You may feel, you may find, a rhythm that works best for you. Anyone else? Did anyone else sew a test block besides Nadia?
I had another question.
Yeah.
Is the seam pressed open?
So I don't press my seams open in quilting. I always press them to the side. That is a point of contention with quilters. So some people like to press open and some people press to one side. I am a pressing to one side in patchwork. And so I usually press, which way?
To the dark side or the light side?
Yeah. In most patchwork, I am pressing to the dark side. I feel like for this particular block, what I remember is that it's going to press towards the. One day I'm going to remember the concave. So I'm going to be pressing this on this block. I would press outwards this way. So I find that these blocks, you're going to kind of see they're going to want to go in that direction. And so that's the direction that I press in.
Do you have to notch the curve?
No, you shouldn't. It's so small that you shouldn't have to do any notching on this.
Okay.
In a sleeve on a garment, you've got potentially like 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch. And so sometimes in those kinds of curves, you are doing some notching, or in a bag, you might be doing some notching. But theoretically with in patchwork, you don't usually notch. A good question.
Just to be clear again, when you put the concave, when you're making your curve, it's that seam. Do you press that open or not? You know what I'm saying? Like when you're adding, no. So, okay. All seams are to one side.
That's okay. Yeah. For me, again, so this is, I think, it's not that it's the only way to do it. But usually I don't like to press my patchwork seams open. Some people really like to press their patchwork seams open. You can, I feel like potentially it is or feels flatter that way sometimes, and maybe a little bit more accurate. What I don't like about pressing your seams open in patchwork is because then you've got, if you can kind of imagine, you've got all of these open, like that, if that seam is pressed open there, then that line is kind of like open in a way, like, and I feel like it's less stable, especially for a quilt that might be used and worn and washed and sort of, I feel like that's less stable to me. Just an opinion though, definitely not a hard rule that everyone follows.
The way it was described to me at one point was if your seam ever came apart, you still have fabric shifting and covering your batting into place. And that made a lot of sense to me.
That's a good way to think about it.
And if you stitch in the ditch, you stitch in the lower seam and it's a nice finish.
Right.
And you can't do that if you're ironing them open.
Yeah, that's a good point, Rosa. Okay. Well, so this week is all about getting started with some actual cutting and doing a test block. So if folks want to try doing a test block and posting a photo this week, it would be great to see those blocks start to pop up. You can always email me if you have any questions. I will send this Zoom link out in a day or two. And I will also include information about the blocks for Danielle if anyone is interested in that. And then I'll look through the chat for the list of people who are looking to connect with rulers, and I'll try to do some matching up there to connect folks that way as well for getting access to a ruler. Okay. Well, I'm here if anyone has any questions. I can hang out for a few minutes. Last week, I know I kind of just jumped off really quickly because I had to literally get in the car and drive to Toronto. So this week I'm in a little bit more of a chill zone now that everything is up here, and today I actually have a day off. So I'm happy to hang out for a few more minutes if people want to ask me anything, and or just chat for a minute before they go. But thank you everyone for joining in, and thank you for posting your fabrics and all of your questions, and looking forward to moving these quilts along.
Thank you, Karen. I have to leave, so I'll say goodbye.
Okay, great. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
Thanks.
Thank you. See you later.
Thanks,
Okay,
Karen.
bye. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye.
Oh,
See you later.
bye.
Oh, what is the sleeve?
Bye, friend.
See you.
Bye.
Have a good week.
Yeah, you too. Everything good?
James's templates worked really well.
I want to know all about it.